Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the drop-in adventure, The Skull of Dragnalar, designed by Maxwell Zener for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links if you're online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Basil, Christopher, Dave, Star, Loverly, and Gaston, and gold patrons, RPG, Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, Numa, Marcos, Dave, Vicente, Gilberto, Adam, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Rosh, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Sclinia, Nick, and Party McButterpants. Thank you all very much for your support. Skull of Dragnalar is a adventure for level 4, although it scales for level 3 to 5. The designer mentions that it could be a good kind of graduating adventure for tier 1. It's pretty challenging. It's a very solid adventure, and I'm using the term drop-in instead of a one-shot, although it could very much be used as a one-shot. I feel like a lot of one-shots tend to presume that maybe we'll be making characters for this event and then not playing them again. You know, it's kind of a just out there, separate, special what-if storyline, which, I mean, you could play this as that, and that's not necessarily a definition of all one-shots, but this also goes out of its way to be included in an ongoing campaign. You're just heroes, you are hired to do a job, and the job here is that you have to recover this very evil artifact. And this is an adventure that is pretty straightforward. There's not really any, major interwoven stories or drama or twists or betrayals or anything like that. It's honestly, you're hired to recover this evil artifact, which was stolen by a group of thieves, and the thieves were stupid and, of course, touched the damn thing, and that unleashed this wave of evil in this area. And you're hired to go recover that, and that's pretty much the whole thing. Like, you have to go to this area, you have to get it back. There's a lot of evil undead shit in the way. You beat them up, and then you can return. Now, I am grossly paraphrasing, and I will get into the actual adventure, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad adventure. It's just, it's not a big, complicated, huge grossing adventure, and it's not necessarily supposed to be either. This is, as I mentioned, a drop-in. It could be used as a one-shot. It's pretty simple, and obviously as a DM you can change whatever you want, but I think it is extremely well designed within those constraints. The only thing I don't like is the actual time limit that this adventure provides. If I were running this campaign, I would eliminate that completely. There's a whole, basically, you're given the mission, you have 24 hours to accept, except in this case you have, I think, 6 hours. And if you don't do the thing by the end of the 6-hour mark, which is entirely up to the DM to track, then the portals that this crystal skull, has been creating to the abyss are permanent instead of temporary. So it just creates kind of a weird epilogue sequence where if you wanted to, if you wanted to continue on to the story, then you could, although I would argue a lot of drop-in adventures, you're looking for like a side quest material, most likely, and not necessarily, okay, this is what I want to do for the rest of my campaign is deal with this threat. So it works better as an open and shut case, in other words. That's just me. I'm not a big fan of the time thing, but you could easily skip it. What it does well is it's organized very, very well. It's organized like an Adventurers League mission. It has about that same length. It doesn't, overdo combat, for example, and the combat that does have feels meaningful and powerful. It does a good job of providing gory action, which is not something I see in D&D too much. We see horror used somewhat, but even then, not very, not a whole lot of that. And this, I think, uses horror in a fun way, with the caveat that because we're playing D&D, we're all playing badasses. It's kind of that aliens versus alien usual horror, because the players are usually very competent and powerful, even though monsters can obviously be even more powerful than that. It does a good balance of exploration, combat, and socialization for the most part. There are 2 NPCs you can rescue, for example. Both of them can have information, so I think that kind of checks that box minimally for me. So it provides all those things and does a very good job doing it. It's just not the most exciting story. Basically, the thing you get at the beginning is pretty much the major part of this story. So it does have a really nice adventure background, all of this information about how to adjust the adventure, how to put it in different settings, a nice little mini dramatis personae about all the important characters, And then, of course, if you played Adventures League modules, you're familiar with this kind of breakdown about how the scenario works. This one doesn't have the side quests that I feel like a lot of Adventures League modules might have. Instead, you're literally teleported to outside the dungeon, a little bit further outside. I guess they even mentioned you're a couple miles outside. And the adventure basically just takes place around the dungeon. So it's not like there's extra side quests to go do. Now, you could explore more of that dungeon and thus try to get more things done. But even then, the main quest you have is to recover the Crystal Skull. And then the side quest is to recover the quest giver's grandson, I believe, who was part of the first adventuring. He's the very classic, like, hey, we sent a bunch of other, you were not the first people we called. Sorry. We sent another team in. They haven't called back. So be sure to check on them. Hopefully they're still alive. Spoiler alert, of course. Only the grandson is still alive, and even then barely hanging on by a thread. But you'll basically meet him like in the main critical path. So not really a whole lot of side stuff to go do. But there's still, I think, a good amount of player agency and exploration here for two reasons. One, there's a extensive skill challenge in the swamp outside, and I've got mixed feelings about skill challenges. I think they can work very well, and they can also not work very well. And this is an example of how to use skill challenges very well. And second, getting into the dungeon is provided almost like a heist scenario where it's like, here's the situation, here are all the dangers. Players, what do you do? And that is great design. And that's a hard thing to design as a designer because you feel like you need to make sure you come up with all these plans and ways for players to continue your story. But in some ways, when you're running the game, you need to be able to sit back and instead of, as a DM, you need to provide problems and not necessarily solutions. Now, you need to have some backup plans just in case things get really crazy and try to, forge a story out of that. But if you can provide just a bunch of problems, more than likely, depending on your group, your players will provide really interesting and fun solutions. So let's go over the skill challenge first, which is that your players, first of all, there's a really long right here. This is probably too long, honestly. If you need almost a full page to give your monologue, essentially, of your quest and not allow any kind of... It even says the party does not have time to negotiate, change spells. This is not meant to be a dialogue scene. This is meant to be just me, as the DM, telling the players what's going on. That's a little bit much. But the quest is... some thieves have stolen a very ancient evil artifact, the Skull of Dragnalar, which has been in a special containment field, and it has been released. And when that happens, it creates a bunch of portals to the abyss, so it unleashes a bunch of demons in the area. That's bad news. And also basically creates a localized zombie apocalypse. Any creature who dies within a certain radius of like hundreds of yards, I think, are turned into a zombie. So that's also obviously a bummer and creates a major problem for the thieves because, as you can already probably imagine, and I'm sure the party realizes pretty quickly once they accept the quest, the first adventuring party and the thieves themselves have pretty much all been zombified, and in addition, there's a bunch of demons running around. So it's just a very dark, violent, gory action thing. That's just what you need to expect from the theme. And there are some content warnings here. There's one particularly nasty trap, which I'll get into in a second, with a swamp area that you could skip as a DM. It's a little bit. It involves we'll get there. But I like the skill challenge. So your teleport. So the quest giver offers you a device that they teleport you to outside of the dungeon, which is a hideout, basically the bandits' hideout, and you get teleported, in the swamp in that surrounding area, and then they give you a device that is your magical return home whenever you have retrieved the skull, which they say don't touch the skull because it'll fuck you up, and put it back in this containment box, which they give you. It's got the anti-magic field and all that. And then once you've got that within the 6-hour mark, then break open this pearl, whatever it is, and you'll teleport everybody within 10 feet of you back to us, and that'll complete the adventure. I don't like the time constraint. You know what? If you want to, the reason behind the time constraint, I think, is if you want to limit rests. And if you want to do that, then I would just tell the players, like, hey, you've got this much time, and then as a DM, I'm not going to track the time. Screw that. That's just way too fiddly nonsense. Instead, you're basically telling the party you cannot long rest. And you could just argue, like, hey, the magic of your time thing will just fade away and you'll be stuck here in this remote area. Like, it's just bad news. So you cannot long rest during this adventure, and, probably limit them to like 2 or 3 short rests. And I don't think at that level they would probably do more than 2 short rests anyway. but you know, it's important for that balancing. That's how I would do it. Anyway, the skill challenge. So you're put in the swamp. In the swamp, getting to the dungeon, instead of having a bunch of bullshit random combat encounters, which would slow things down and ultimately not do much but just drain the resources, because that's how D&D is balanced, instead it provides a skill challenge and has a bunch of random encounters. But random encounters isn't necessarily, I mean, technically that's right, but none of these are combat encounters, which is what I like. None of them are combat encounters. Well, that's not true. Some of them are like mini combat encounters. I'll say that. They only last for like a round or two, and it'll be some like nasty, crazy. One of them, in fact, if they roll really badly, it turns like half the party members. It's anybody who fails the saving throw is turned into a zombie temporarily, and then attacks the other party members, and that lasts for like a round or something. And that'd be a really funny thing to do. And then your party's like, "What's going on?" And then everybody flips back, but you retain all that damage. Other stuff is like more evocative, like they just see like, you know, creatures wither and die. Some of it is, you know, they'll take like damage, psychic damage or necrotic damage or acid damage or something. So it's just, you know, you create those great moments where you're building, you're doing damage to the party. Some of them you're doing some damage, a little bit, but you're also just you're painting that picture for them. You're creating that zone, the area of danger, and you are it does a great job, I think, of having encounters that aren't combat related but are about world building and teasing what this skull can do. Now, what your party can do is make a skill challenge. In this case, they need 6 successes before 3 failures. They can use whatever skill they're proficient in. But if a skill is reused, no matter if it's the same party member or a different party member, for example, one person wants to use survival, another person wants to use survival, they can do that, but it just ups the DC number that they're trying to do. And it's just up to the party members to decide what skill they want to do and how they want to do it. Now, there's a whole system here where it's like, okay, if the party wants to go slow, you can give them advantage, but then that adds like 40 minutes. Again, I hate all that. Get rid of all that time constraint. Instead, if somebody just comes up with a plan that seems really, really fun or interesting or clever use of that skill, then I might grant advantage. Versus if it's something that seems like it would be very challenging for them to pull off, I may grant disadvantage to it. And what I would go is every time they fail, I would roll one of these random encounter effects and have them suffer those consequences. And here's the part that makes this skill challenge work. Whether they succeed or fail, they're still going to make it through the swamp. The difference is if they, depending on how much they succeed versus their failures, depends on the DC they have to roll to avoid exhaustion once they reach the swamp, because then it's just a nice little end result of their excursion through the swamp is just how much. And in fact, it says if you miss the saving throw by 10 or more, it's a con saving throw, then you can actually suffer 2 points of exhaustion going into that final dungeon battle. Again, there's no long rest opportunity here, so that's a good way of just breaking up that action. And I like the way that works, honestly. Like, that's skill challenges can go very badly if it's just like a yes or no binary in terms of you succeed or you fail. You know, you can continue the story or you can't continue the story. This is an example of why it works really well, because you're failing forward, you're still making it to the dungeon, but you've, you know, accrued all these failures and possibly suffered a lot more of those random encounters. And then when you actually get to the dungeon, which I think we'll have to skip ahead, this one does have maps. The good news is it has maps, player maps, DM maps, non-gridded and gridded versions, including an isometric 3D map, which is very helpful because the map is multiple stories. The bad news is they're all in black and white, but we can get to the map area right here. So the dungeon area, I'm just calling it a dungeon because it's any area that's, you know, meant to be room by room. It's not a literal dungeon. It's a bandit outpost, like a fortress, is surrounded by a moat filled with alligator or crocodiles, I guess. Probably should be alligators. I assume they're freshwater, but whatever. Surrounded by a moat, drawbridges up, has a 10-foot wall surrounding it, and in the courtyard area is a bunch of zombies and mains, which are the lowest level of the demon hordes, I believe. So that is your scenario. You basically tell the players all this information, you know, assuming they've got the perception to see the crocodigators in the moat. And how do they cross it? And it's basically up to them. Like, they can, if they've got teleporting spells, again, we're 4th level, so you don't have a whole lot of utility spell options, but you probably have some. You can teleport across, try to lower that bridge. swing a rope across, shoot something over there, whatever it is means they want to do. And then obviously somebody could use an action to lower the drawbridge, but then they're maybe trying to sneak around some of the zombies, or you've got some, in there. It just creates a cool like mini heist opportunity for the players to really try to figure out a plan, or they can just foolhardily like swim across the moat, fight off the gator, whatever they want to do, smash and grab. But I like that. That's a player agency that gives them, even though these kind of adventures, which are these Adventure League drop-in dungeons, are always going to be very, very linear. To the point where, do you want to go on the adventure or not? Here's the swamp leads to the dungeon. The dungeon is here. There's no branching path. We're not doing any of that. This is just the thing, which is fine. That's how I expected this to go. But what I appreciate is when it creates these opportunities for players to have all those choices. In this case, the skill challenge for the swamp created a whole lot of player agency for the players to decide, what skills they want to do and be able to role play their characters doing it, which is fun. And as well as all those random events, which we'll get into some of those when we get to the appendix. And then the opportunity to figure out how they're going to get into this courtyard area and into this outpost, which is really cool. They could, smash and grab their way. They could try to sneak in. They could do a combination. They could split the party, have some people. And I'm really picturing the Walking Dead scenario. And that's a lot of how I picture the theme of this adventure is very like Walking Dead TV show or comics, where the players are presented with an opportunity where there's like a whole bunch of enemies. They can see them. It's not necessarily a question of surprise or ambushing, and it's almost they're more of an environmental hazard more than a combat encounter, although of course it's D&D, so you're probably going to throw down with some combat occasionally. When you actually make it into the building, whether you fought your way in or not, there are barrel gorillas. That's a hard word to say. It's the demon gorillas, which are pretty strong. There's a pair of them, and there are a whole bunch of let's see, which I guess is the biggest map that shows it. All the previous adventuring party are strung up, and most of them have been zombified, so they're hanging there. There's blood and gore and viscera all over. The barrel gorillas have just been ripping these poor men and women to shreds, I guess. And and it mentioned the content warning, like, hey, you can be as gory and violent and graphic as you want, or just mention the fact that this is what the scenario looks like. The barrel gorillas will attack. You can save the grandson. But what's interesting is the zombies are literally used as a environmental hazard here, where they can, bite people that are near them, as reactions or on their turn, but they're tied up technically. They can't really attack. But it's a cool thing that it creates that Walking Dead scenario where you've got zombies who are not necessarily walking around. They're handicapped in some way, basically, and that works again in the cellar, just because everything has been zombified. Whether it just as long as it's got intact like brain, I guess, if you want to use Walking Dead rules. No matter what its condition is, or even if that's, going to make for a good monster encounter. Instead, it becomes an environmental hazard, which I think is really interesting. The players could explore the kind of balcony area that's got the murder holes on the outside, just a bunch of zombies running around up there. It's a very low item. It's meant to be more of a hardcore, challenging, kind of low magic scenario. I don't think there's any magic items you can recover here. The best thing you can do is recover like alchemist fire type thing. So I might include a magic item in there if they were actually going to fight their way. There are 2 survivors the players can find. One of them is, as I mentioned, the grandson has survived. He's one of the, of course, he's the one survivor that's still hanging, hasn't been zombified yet. And the other one is one of the thieves has survived by holding up in one of the upstairs rooms. And both of them will just provide information. They can join the party. They can not join the party. They can be tied up. It's just up to the players and how they want to do them. They can just interrogate them. It just leaves it up to the party, basically. The one grandson will want to join the party. He's a fighter and want to help them, whereas the thief, of course, will want to just, take care of his own skin, and that's pretty much it. It teases the boss at the end by having this giant opening in the ceiling, which, by the way, players could have scaled the building and gone in this way. There's a hole in the roof that they can come down at. And be able to pop down in either room 6 or room 5 and maybe get a jump on the Brawl Girls. Although it does mention, I think, the Brawl Girls can't be surprised. The question is whether the players can be surprised by them, because those enemies can turn invisible basically at will, I think, or maybe once per day. And then when they get to the basement, which is, I believe there's a trap door in the kitchen area in room number 3. This scenario has a bunch of, similar to the first room, a bunch of legless zombies. Now, I would create a kind of interesting combination of zombies walking around and some legs, whatever. But they provide, again, an environmental hazard where a Vrock, another demon, is lurking and will act as kind of the boss battle. Although, the goal of this room is not to defeat the Vrock. It's to recover the skull, which is inside a crate that one of the thieves has grabbed, and his hands fused to it. He's been zombified. Everybody's been zombified because the whole thing went off. And then the Vrock has been slowly eating all of these poor zombie humanoids, and it's all just gory and messy. So the whole goal is just to recover that, but of course they've got all these, you know, legless zombies here that can crawl around or try to attack. They're not meant to move around. I think they're meant to literally just be environmental hazards. I might let them move around a little bit slowly just to make it a little bit more fun. But that rock is going to fly around and obviously jack everybody up. So I think it's got a good balance of very few combat encounters, but the ones that it does have are very meaningful with very tough opponents and interesting environmental hazards, which I think is really, really cool. I've kind of been sticking to the maps because it's easier for me to talk about the adventure by going room to room. But the actual, as you can see here, adventure, it's very well laid out. It's well organized. There's a lot of nice artwork through here. You know, it uses the traditional, you know, 2-column with sidebars and all the right font and stuff. I love this isometric map here because that really helped me look at the map. Because if you just look at this map, it gets really confusing on what floor we're on and what things are supposed to look like. So that really helps a lot in terms of having that that second level with the balcony that overlooks, you know, the first level, and it looks really fun. I enjoy this adventure quite a bit. I don't like the time constraint at all. I don't think it works. Especially because it doesn't seem to really matter. The only thing that matters is with the conclusion on whether or not you want to continue the campaign as, oh, now we've got all these portals that are open and, you know, permanently because you guys just weren't fast enough. Like, that just doesn't seem very interesting to me, unless I wanted to turn this into a bigger adventure, and, you know, maybe you want to do that. In terms of the random encounters, it does add some interesting new stuff. There's at one point like a demon tentacle that can pop out of the ground. The one crazy one is this Vugu Gumoth, which I don't know if this is original creation or not, but it's a stat block here, and it's like a zombie. There's like a baby inside the rib cage of this zombie, which is meant to be like a Venus flytrap situation where you reach in and try to rescue this baby, and then it's just all part of the trap that this monstrous fiend actually sets up and then tries to bite you as you try to like rescue this baby, and it's pretty messed up and gross. I would probably skip that one, but again, you can be as gory and violent and weird about this stuff as you want. That one might get a little too far for me, having kind of baby in dire situations, but otherwise I think it's a solid adventure. It doesn't do a whole lot with its story, but neither do I necessarily expect it to do a whole lot with its story. I just expect it to be well organized and, you know, cover those 3 pillars of a D&D adventure, and I think it does that pretty well. Let's go over my pros and cons for the Skull of Dragnalar. Pro, evocative, clever, random encounters, none of which involve combat. Very cool. Pro, excellent detailed use of a skill challenge. Honestly, probably one of the better skill challenges. It just does a great job of explaining what a skill challenge is, how to run the skill challenge, what are some example skills we can use, rules for failing and succeeding and repeating different skills. Like, this is really like the gold standard of how to use a skill challenge in an adventure. Pro, solid balance of exploration, socialization, and combat. Pro, notes for inserting the adventure into bigger campaigns and adjusting combat encounters for levels 3 to 5. All of the different combat situations or anywhere where there's potential combat has notes for adjusted party levels, I believe from what just says less than 4 or greater than 4, but it top of it says 3 to 5th level. And Pro, isometric 3D map and top-down battle maps with separate grid, non-gridded, and player versions. Very, very much a thumbs up. On the con side, those maps are unfortunately black and white only, and these are really nicely detailed maps. So I really like the way they look. It's just a huge bummer that we didn't get that extra step to make it color, because you could almost argue it's like a classic like Night of the Living Dead situation where it's all black and white, but come on, we're using VTTs. I'm using VTT. Give me some color on these nice maps. And the other con is the time constraint aspect. I don't like that at all. That doesn't work for me. There's even notes about, hey, check one of these off every 10 minutes, and then when you get to 3 of them, you run it. Like, no, I'm not doing that. I'll run one of those random encounters every once in a while, or just with the swamp encounters. We got enough going on in the dungeon, and I just don't like the fact that you could fail just because some arbitrary time constraint. I do like the fact that you're limiting them on the rests, but just tell them like, hey, you've got this much time, and I'm only gonna let you this many rests. Final verdict: with gory action and player-focused exploration and skill challenges, the Skull of Dragnalar is a solid one-shot or drop-in adventure despite its relatively simple premise. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.